Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Window Chats with Robyn, the podcast where I sit by my window and chat with very interesting people. Today's guests are Millie Tom and Rachel Osbourne. Thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
This is the first time I've done a pre-recorded with two people, so we're gonna see if it works. I'm excited.
Amazing. We'll be your guinea pigs.
Honestly, I was gonna start off with like the hardest question, so then everything else will get easier because that's how I roll. But what is it? Just stating the obvious. What does it mean to be a BIPOC casting director?
I feel like it's just going to be heavy, but okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
So for me, what makes being a racialized or woman of color casting director different? I don't know if I want to say different, but what's unique about being a racialized casting director is I think we bring a different perspective to stories, whether it's a all-white story or a mixed race story or an all one race cast. Like, we see, just generally as people, we see the world differently. Millie will see the world differently than I do. She will have different insights. She's lived a lot more life than me. Should I say that? I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Is it true?
Oh my God, sorry. I didn't,
It's the truth, though. I mean, I'm in a different generation. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have those things, and you can't discount the life that a casting director has lived and how they will see story. Because when we read a script, which is the first thing we usually do when we get hired, when we read a script, we're going to interpret a lot of different things in the script. The two of us will read the same script and we'll definitely have some similarities because Sagittarius is, but we, just because of our life experiences and our backgrounds, we're going to see the script a little bit different, and we might see the characters a little bit different. So who is casting matters. The industry likes to say, oh, the best person wins. And no, but we can't discount that. We are all biased. We can't get, because we're in a creative field, because we're doing something artistic, because casting is also artistic, because we're doing something artistic doesn't mean there's no bias in it. So being a BIPOC casting director, we are going to have different perspectives that we can lend to a story, is all I'm saying, in a long way.
Absolutely.
For me, I just wanted to be a well-respected working casting director. That's always been my goal. I always feel like casting is an extension of storytelling, and that's how I was taught. That's how I was mentored under my mentor. And for me, storytelling, I always wanted to see I wanted to see me represented up there on the big screen or on the little screen. I wanted to see, that's the first thing I ever did. Even right from a child, I would go and I'd look for the Asian and be like, oh my gosh, there's an Asian. I'd watch, you'd watch MASH and be like, oh, there's Asians. Okay, so maybe they're the prostitute or they're like the villager or they're the whatever. But, there were just Asians on screen. And I really sort of, again, who wouldn't want to see themselves represented? So when I went into casting, I didn't go into casting thinking, oh, I'm BIPOC and I'm like, oh, look at me. In fact, if anything, I really, I never wanted to be hired because of the color of my skin. And that was a really tricky thing where I'm like, I don't really want you to hire me because I'm not. But I also like the idea that because I am BIPOC, I might have something to add. It's almost like a spice, right? I might actually be flavorful. I might be like a clove or cumin or something. There's something different. I have different perspectives. I always like to tell stories authentically. To me, that's, I think, if anything, where my BIPOCness comes in or my identity comes in would be the fact that I wanted Asian stories to be told properly. That was the interesting thing about, casting something like Kim's Convenience when you knew some of those actors weren't Korean. And, at the time, also the talent pool didn't necessarily lend itself. It's funny. I'm thinking, what, that was 2015. And I mean, now the talent pool is incredibly rich with Korean talent in that sort of age category. And you're like, wow, like, but again, with Amma and Appa, there's still not that many. Like, when you think about who would play Appa now, I can't, and they aged Paul up. That was, Paul was playing 20 years plus his age. So you're just kind of like, wow, what would we do? And what would you do now? And that's, again, you're only limited to your budget, you're limited to your talent pool, you're limited, how authentically can you tell that story given the limitations or the restrictions that you have? And again, we're not some big studio, it's not some major like Sony or Paramount where, money was not an object and we're going to tell it properly. Like, I'm watching, there are these casting calls for this amazing project that Robert Downey Jr. is doing. I think it's for HBO Max, and I don't know, but it's very Vietnamese centric, and they are so precise about the Vietnamese search that they're doing. They have to speak this, or they have to speak this, or they have to speak a specific dialect, and I'm like, wow, that's exciting. I mean, that scares the crap out of me, but that's exciting.
Because like when I'm listening to you talk about Kim's Convenience, I'm thinking maybe the talent pool is bigger now because of a show like Kim's Convenience, because because one of the things that I think is a byproduct of not casting authentically is that the talent pool that you're missing when you have to make those kind of concessions, they don't realize that they can make a career out of acting. So that's one byproduct of just like not casting authentically. You're actually doing a disservice. And I understand the whole, like, there are so many other business factors that go into casting that even actors don't know because no one talks to them about it. So I don't know. It's the more the work keeps happening, the more specificity, I think that actually will increase the pool when people are seeing themselves on screen.
Yeah. I mean, but ultimately you want to do it. You want to be able to, I think it's a nice thing about sort of being BIPOC is we can appreciate why that story has to be told so authentically and why it's necessary. I mean, we just, Rachel and I just worked on a project where we were looking for, it was based in Kenya, and it was so important to make sure we had Africans, like proper Africans, and because they needed to be from there. The story is told that they've never been anywhere else, that they've only ever been in Kenya or Nairobi. And that was so important to that storytelling. And so what was interesting was financing meant that we actually had to bring Canadians to become Kenyans. And you're like, oh, and I remember the first time when I was like, I don't even know how to live up to this challenge when I don't even think that's like, you're just like, oh, okay, are we going to do this? And are we really doing this? Like, are we just going to go and ask for like, and that's something that I learned, having just come off of Robin Hood, where Black storytelling, there's all like so many nuances within the Black community that I didn't even know. So that, that was such an education for me. And again, I am BIPOC, and I'm as ignorant as they come when it comes to, because again, sometimes it's like an education. It's like a learning. It's such a huge learning curve when you're trying to tell stories authentically, but you don't know that community, and I'm always asking Rachel questions. I mean, I'm always like, okay, let me ask you this. In your community, why can't I do this? Or can I say this? And, I mean, again, she might think I'm being like totally like, girl, you're crazy. Or like, you're just like ignorant. But in the end, I feel like, I would rather be able to ask Rachel that question and maybe it come across as ignorant than not do it and not do it properly and not ask the question.
Yeah, I take issue where people don't want to ask the question, where people don't want to be specific, where they don't want to learn, because exactly what you said, Millie, is where we're at right now. And we can't really say, this is how it's always been done and just do it that way. It's like, now we have to learn. And even if like just by the fact that we are women of color, we know that even though I might not know the specificities of this community, I know that I need to look out for them. I need to ask questions. If I read the script and I don't understand something, instead of being blind and just saying, well, I'm just going to ask for what's on the breakdown, or I'm just going to make it up. Because especially since casting directors have to write breakdowns, you have to be culturally sensitive, or at least aware. Because that's the first place where story goes wrong, if a breakdown isn't written properly, or sensitively, I should say.
It's just it's so weird because I go, oh yes, I would watch TV and look, there's a white girl. I never really considered what it would be like if she wasn't white. So I just think it's so important for people to be aware of how odd it must be to not see themselves on screen.
And I think it's not just seeing yourself on screen, it's how you're being portrayed on screen. Because as Millie said, like, if you're watching MASH, you're not getting the lead role, so you might be represented as some kind of villainous or anti-hero type character. And a lot of Black people have seen that, where, coming up in Blaxploitation or other type of films in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even all the way back to like those mommy films, like we didn't see ourselves as executives or as the hero, or so that's a big thing too now, where a show like Kim's Convenience is so important, because you're seeing them as the stars, the people who the story is centered around, and that's big.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about how I've been catching up on my Transplant. And
yes.
Just again, how extraordinary is it, like, that we now have a lead, a South Asian, well, I mean, he's South Asian, but he's playing a Middle Eastern, but you're just like, wow, like, that's amazing storytelling. Like, here is this really extraordinary opportunity that came out of Canada, where we're like seeing this incredible like male lead. I remember when Hamza came into, the first time I ever saw him in an audition room, he came in and I was like, dude, who are you? You are like, you need a series. He hadn't even opened his mouth yet. I was just like, I was, who are you? And I couldn't get over how like striking he was, and how I was like, dude needs to be on a series. So I was thrilled when Hamza ended up getting a series. So yeah. But, and again, times are changing. I was having a conversation with somebody else who was Middle Eastern, and we were talking about how, for the longest time they were seeing themselves portrayed as terrorists. Yeah. And how for him, it was really important to tell his team, his management team and his agent, that I will not play terrorists. And you go, isn't that fascinating? Like, you now have an opportunity to work. And I get it. Like, you don't want to play those types of roles. You do not want to be pigeonholed into something where you're not representing your community well. And, and that's tricky too.
I think one of the things that's actually making that change, where people are seeing themselves in other types of roles, is that now more BIPOC creators are getting money. Before 2020, that was still an uphill battle for them to get funding. And even now, getting funding, it's still not always enough. The telefilms aren't giving them enough, or the other organizations, they're not necessarily giving them enough to fully make a feature or whatever, but at least there is more of that now. So there are more stories from people of those communities. And that's what I'm really excited about, seeing those kinds of things get made and seeing how they go about their casting. I know there's still some difficulties when you get to the studio level and have to go through approvals. So it's still a white man at the top approving your cast. So I'm hoping that barrier can be the next one to be knocked down.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, yeah, that's the other interesting thing about casting, right? Casting is about options. We provide options. We provide choices. At the end of the day, as much as I would love, John to get this role, what if production doesn't even respond to John? And they're like, meh, we don't get it. And then they go to Sam. And I'm like, yeah, I brought Sam in and I don't mind Sam, but it's not John. You're like, no, but they love Sam. And you're like, all right. And that's the hardest part. I think for me, I take it all so personally. I wanted Sam to get it. So the fact, or, you know, no, wait, I think I wanted John to get it. Wasn't it who I wanted? Yeah. So it's just like, you know, and you're like, oh. You know, and again, that's the other thing. Like, my job is to provide choices and options. Where the higher ups go and take it, it's on, you know, it's in the decision making. And the only power I have is to bring people in and to get them seen.